Hello everyone, back at it again in my little yellow kayak. This is my first open water kayak trip of the year and I'm hoping to make it a good one. I had to drive south about an hour to find some open water, so this is pretty early in the springtime. The water's stained but it's fairly clear and it's not very deep here. It took me a while to figure out this place, but it's basically like a giant weed flat. Even in the deepest point of the pond, there's still a fair amount of weeds. So it sets up like a giant weed flat. I don't know if you can tell, but in the bushes on my right there, that's the south side, there's a little bit of scrap snow and ice way back in the bushes. It's hard to see on the video. But anyway, that just means that we're not too far away from ice out. The pond's a little bit slow. Nothing's really going full speed yet, and I'm going to try to make this work. So my plan is to paddle to the eastern side, which should be warmed up by this afternoon sun, and same with the north and northeast side. Just kind of depends on how the sun is hitting the water and if the pond has a little bit of an angle to it. Sometimes it can be the north side, sometimes it could be the east side, sometimes it's the northeast corner, sometimes it's where a little river or stream comes in, especially if it's a shallow river or stream and the water in there is just a little bit warmer than the pond water or the lake water. Sometimes places like that can be a gold mine. So I'm skipping all over this south shore here. It's a little bit more shady. I can see there's ice way back in the bushes. I want to skip right over all of this stuff, and I'm going to focus on some of the higher percentage shorelines, and we'll get to it. So I made it to a spot I want to fish. We got a rocky outcropping here. This is going to be a high percentage spot, something you definitely want to hit up before you leave. And it seemed like the fish were always near rock, but it couldn't just be plain rock. It had to be rocks and weeds mixed together. Plain weeds or plain rock didn't do as well for me, although I think I caught a couple pickerel out of just straight weeds. But it was, for bass, it was where the rock and the weeds came together. That was the deal. And it took me a little while to figure that out. I started off with a Bill Lewis ATV crank, the 1.0. And even that was diving a little bit too deep in the weeds. You know, it's very early spring. The weeds haven't really grown much at all yet, but there's still weeds left over from last year, and they're pretty thick. I mean, in some places I even ran across some mats, which is unusual for New England in early spring. So I imagine in the summer, this place is pretty thick with weeds. Probably good for a frog. Anyway, the ATV crank was diving a little bit too deeply, so I switched to a Yozuri 3DS wake, and it's really more of a shallow water crank than a wake bait. I have to get this crankbait untangled from my net. It's going to take me a minute. We'll just skip ahead. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do here is select the crankbait that will just tick the tops of the weeds and not get buried in the weeds. So I started out with the ATV crank, the Bill Lewis ATV crank 1.0, and that was, even that, it's not a terribly deep runner. Even that was getting buried in the weeds, and the fish won't hit it if it's, totally covered up in weeds. You want to be able to pop it through the weeds, rip it free of the weeds, bounce off rocks, bounce off wood, and I'm hooked up again. I think this was a big pickerel, I can't remember, but he's pulling me a little bit. Anytime the fish is pulling the boat around, pulling the kayak, that usually is a sign I've got a better fish on. So the ATV crank is great for wood, rocks. It's not great in weeds, but it is pretty snag resistant. You can fish it through almost anything unless it gets bogged down in weeds. Now the Yozuri wake, it's not quite as good in hard cover like rocks and wood, things like that, and it gets around the weeds by running above them for the most part. So, it's good to have a selection of crankbaits with you, and if I'm not touching the weeds, there he is. There's the big pickerel. He looked like he just ate a bluegill or something. You see that bulge in his stomach? And there he goes. Thanks for all the slime, buddy. So when I'm fishing a crankbait, if I wasn't connecting with the tops of weeds or rocks or wood, I would just go up to a 2.5 crank or even a deep diving crank until I connected with something. You see my retrieve here? It's stop and go, and every once in a while I hit the tops of some weeds and I can't pop it free. That one hit it almost at the boat. And for a lot of the time, it's the change in pace or the change in direction. As you pop it free of something, or ricochet off a rock, or ricochet off of a piece of wood, there's like a triggering mechanism, and the bass usually hit then. You know, it's that change in pace, it's the change in cadence, it's the noise, it's the suddenness of the movement. You don't want to just cast these things out and wind them straight back to the boat without contacting anything. You know, on some days that can work. I'm not going to say it never works, but for me, I have the best luck popping the crankbaits, you know, hitting into things on purpose, ricocheting off of rocks and wood, all that kind of stuff. And that's what triggers the most bites for me. So really what I'm doing here is BFS cranking. I've got a Arc Gravity BFS reel with a Jenko double down rod, and it's a pretty light setup, but that helps me a lot cast these 1/4 ounce crankbaits and even further down the line. So 1/4 ounce crankbaits, just historically, they don't cast great on standard bait casting gear. Now you can get around that by fishing really high-end bait casting gear, $200 rods, $200 reels and up, and that can help those light baits, especially balsa baits. Some of those, you know, like the thin-bodied ones, the flat-side balsa baits, they tend to cast like a potato chip. But when you put them on a BFS rod that's designed for casting light baits like this, you know, it's a different game, and I really like it. I really enjoy throwing the light gear, and you know, even these 2-pound bass, they feel like they're 4-pound bass on the light stuff. And I can cast the light baits. I can cast this combo all day long, you know, without getting tired. There he is. Nice little bass. I'm happy with that for early spring. Nice. Thanks for playing, bud. Alright, I've made my way around to the north side. You can see the sun's kind of in my face, and that's what I want. I want the sun to be kind of beating down on the shoreline that I'm fishing, and I'm not even fishing the shoreline. They hadn't really moved up yet. I would say they were probably in 3 to 5 feet of water on average. You know, in a few more weeks, they'll be right into the rocks. They'll be right into the wood that's on the shoreline. They'll be chasing bluegill around the shallows. And I think it's just so close to ice out, they hadn't really pushed up yet. That's another one on the Yozuri 3DS Wake. Now it's a shame, I think they discontinued this bait, but it's similar in profile and size and action to like a Baby 1 Minus, or the junior size of the XPS egg, the smaller version of the egg. It looked like they just brought the egg back. Bass Pro Shops did, but I didn't see the smaller size. So something in that, you know, shallow running crankbait category. That's what I would use. But if you could find the Yozuri 3DS Wake, you know, maybe on eBay or you know, some other online vendor, I'd recommend picking them up. It's a shame too, because I think if Yozuri knew what they had, they would have given it a different name, because it's really not a great wake bait at all. You know, I'm reeling it pretty fast, and it's not on the surface at all. It dives about 10-12 inches deep, and it even has a little bit of a hunting action, which is rare in any crankbait, but it's especially rare in the Yozuri price point. So yeah, I think if they just named it something else, like the best shallow running crankbait ever, instead of a wake bait, it would still be in production and you could still get them easily. A little bit of a missed opportunity there. Anyway, I had a good trip out here today. Caught a bunch of fish. I think I ended up with 4 bass and 4 pickerel. I cut some of the little pickerel out of the footage. If you've seen one little pickerel, you've kind of seen them all. They all look kind of similar. Little hammer handles. I think I've got one more bass to show you here. Casting into the wind now, and watch, I'm going to pop it out of some weeds. Stop and go retrieve pretty fast. Pop it out of the weeds. And he smoked it. Now, I bet he was following it for quite a ways before he decided to eat it, because, you know, he was almost at the boat when he hit, just like one of the others. The color I'm fishing is, it's called bluegill. It's kind of a stained brown color, and I thought it would be a good match for this water, because I imagine a lot of the bluegill have that stained brown look to them. Almost got me with the hooks there. I was trying to keep them from messing up my net, and yeah, you got to be a little careful with those hooks. There he is. It's not a giant, but I'm happy to catch him on this trip. Thanks for playing, bud. Alright, I had a good afternoon of fishing out here, but the temperature's starting to drop, and I'm thinking about heading back for the ramp. The star today was definitely the BFS crank. I was using a Yozuri 3DS wake, but some other shallow crank would also work pretty well. This pond is in a flight path for an airport that's nearby. And so every once in a while I'd see a plane go overhead, and I'd look at it and see if I could figure out which airline it was. You see me looking up at the sky, that's why. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Just like all my other videos, I'll list all the gear in the video description so you can duplicate what I was doing out here today. Hopefully have a good time fishing wherever you are across the country or across the world. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!